The spit hit her cheek with a wet slap that echoed through the market square. And Tarza did not flinch, because she had learned long ago that flinching only made it worse. She stood in the center of the cobblestones with her basket of herbs clutched against her chest, green skin bright as spring grass under the afternoon sun, tusks small but visible, as she pressed her lips together and let the spittle drip down toward her jaw. The woman who had spit at her was already turning away, skirts swishing with righteous anger, and the crowd around them murmured with approval. Tarza had come to sell the feverfew and chamomile she had gathered from the hills beyond the village, but she should have known better. She always should have known better. Monster, someone hissed from the cluster of market-goers, should have stayed in the mountains where her kind belongs. Tarza began to turn, ready to walk away as she always did, ready to take her herbs back to the cave where she lived alone and try again another day in another village farther down the road. But before she could take a step, a voice cut through the square like a blade through silk. "That is enough." The words were not shouted, but they carried a weight that made every head turn. Tarza looked up to see a man stepping forward from the edge of the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered with hair the color of wheat fields and eyes that held something she could not quite name. He wore simple clothes, a traveler's cloak over a work shirt and trousers, but he moved with the confidence of someone who had seen far more than this small frontier village. The woman who had spit turned back, her face flushing. "This does not concern you, stranger. It concerns anyone with eyes to see and a heart that still beats." The man walked forward until he stood between Tarza and the crowd, and she found herself staring at his back, at the way his shoulders blocked out the hostile faces. She came here to trade, same as anyone. She has done nothing to deserve this. She is an orc, another voice called out, this one belonging to a merchant with a thick beard. "They killed my brother in the border wars. They burn villages and take slaves." "Did she?" The stranger's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Did this woman standing here burn your village? Did she kill your brother? Or are you simply too afraid to see past her skin?" The square went silent. Tarza could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could feel the strange sensation of someone defending her, a feeling so foreign it made her throat tight. She had been alone for 3 years now, ever since her clan had cast her out for refusing to participate in a raid on a human settlement. She had thought she would never again know what it felt like to have someone stand beside her. The merchant sputtered, but no words came. The woman with the dripping hand looked away. One by one, the crowd began to disperse, muttering to themselves but no longer willing to meet the stranger's steady gaze. When the square had mostly cleared, the man turned to face Tarza. Up close, she could see that his eyes were gray like storm clouds, and there were lines at their corners that spoke of laughter and sorrow in equal measure. He looked at her face, at the spit still glistening on her cheek, and something passed across his features that might have been anger or might have been pain. "Here," he said quietly, pulling a clean cloth from his pack. He held it out to her. Tarza stared at the cloth for a long moment before taking it with trembling fingers. She wiped her face, feeling the rough cotton against her skin, and when she was done she found she could not quite meet his eyes. "Thank you," she managed, her voice rough with disuse. She did not speak to people often anymore. "What is your name?" he asked. "Tarza." She clutched the cloth in her fist, wondering if he would want it back now that it was soiled. "Yours, Ethan Sorensen." He glanced at her basket, at the carefully bundled herbs inside. "You are a healer." "I gather herbs. I know their uses." She hesitated, then added, "No one will buy from me, though. They never do." Ethan was quiet for a moment, studying her face in a way that made her want to look away but also made her want to stand straighter. "How much for the feverfew?" Tarza blinked. "What?" "The feverfew, I need some. How much?" "You do not have to do that," she said quickly. "You already helped me. You do not owe me anything. I am not asking out of pity." His voice was patient. "I am asking because I need feverfew and you are selling it, so how much?" She named a price, her voice barely above a whisper. It was less than half what she should have asked, but she was so startled by the entire exchange that she could not think clearly. Ethan counted out the coins without haggling and took the bundle of herbs, tucking them carefully into his pack. "Where are you staying?" he asked. Tarza gestured vaguely toward the hills. "I have a place. A cave about 2 hours north. That is a long walk to make for nothing." He looked around the square, which was now mostly empty. "Is there another village nearby where you might have better luck?" "Perhaps." She did not tell him that every village was the same, that the hate followed her wherever she went. "I should go. The sun will set soon." Ethan nodded slowly. "Be safe, Tarza." She turned to leave, but after a few steps she looked back. He was still standing there, watching her with those storm cloud eyes, and she found herself wanting to say something more. But the words tangled in her throat, and in the end she simply raised one hand in farewell before walking away. The path back to her cave wound through fields of wheat and barley, past farmsteads where dogs barked at her approach, and children were hurried inside by worried mothers. Tarza was used to this. She had grown up in an orc clan that prized strength and aggression, where kindness was seen as weakness and humans were viewed as prey or enemies. She had never fit in, even as a child. She had always wondered why they had to fight, why they could not simply find their own land and live in peace. When she had finally spoken against a planned raid, the clan chief had given her a choice: participate or leave. She had left, taking nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge of herbs her grandmother had taught her before dying. That had been 3 years ago, and in that time she had not spoken to another orc, had barely spoken to anyone at all. The cave she called home was tucked into a hillside, hidden behind a curtain of vines. It was dry and deep enough to stand in, with a small fire pit near the entrance where she cooked her meals. She had made it comfortable in small ways, gathering furs from animals she trapped and arranging her herb bundles on ledges carved into the stone. It was not much, but it was hers. That night, as she lay on her bed of furs and stared at the cave ceiling, she found herself thinking about Ethan Sorensen. About the way he had stepped forward without hesitation, the way he had looked at her like she was a person rather than a monster. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way. She fell asleep with his name on her lips and did not dream at all. 3 days later, Tarza was checking her snares in the forest when she heard the sound of someone crashing through the underbrush. She froze, every instinct telling her to run or hide, but curiosity held her in place. A moment later, Ethan Sorensen stumbled into view, his face pale and one hand pressed against his side. "Tarza," he gasped when he saw her. "Thank the gods." She dropped the rabbit she had been holding and rushed to his side. "What happened?" "Bandits. On the road." He leaned against a tree, and when he moved his hand she could see blood seeping through his shirt. 3 of them. I got away, but not before one of them got his knife in." Tarza did not hesitate. She pulled his arm over her shoulders, taking most of his weight, and began to guide him through the forest. "My cave is close. Can you walk?" "I can try." It took them 20 minutes to reach the cave, and by the time they arrived, Ethan was barely conscious. Tarza laid him down near the fire pit and began to strip away his shirt, her hands steady despite the fear racing through her. The wound was deep, a jagged cut along his left side that had bled heavily. She could see that the blade had not hit anything vital, but infection was a real danger. She worked quickly, building up the fire and setting water to boil. From her stores of herbs she pulled yarrow to stop the bleeding, comfrey to promote healing, and garlic to fight infection. As she cleaned the wound and applied poultices, Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring words she could not understand. When the wound was finally bandaged and she had gotten some willow bark tea into him for the pain, Tarza sat back on her heels and allowed herself to breathe. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline fading, and she had to clench them into fists to make them stop. Ethan opened his eyes, focusing on her with effort. "You saved my life." "You are not out of danger yet," she said, but her voice was gentle. "The wound must not become infected. You will need to stay here for a while." "Here." He looked around the cave, taking in the simple dwelling. "This is where you live?" "Yes." She felt suddenly self-conscious, aware of how primitive it must seem. "It is not much. It is more than I have right now." He tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. "Thank you, Tarza." She nodded and stood to fetch more water. As she worked, she was acutely aware of his presence in her space, the first person to ever see this place she had made her own. It felt strange and vulnerable, and also, in some way she did not quite understand. Over the next several days, Ethan healed slowly. The wound showed no signs of infection, thanks to Tarza's careful tending, but he was weak from blood loss and needed rest. Tarza found herself falling into a routine of caring for him, changing his bandages and making him broths from the game she caught and the vegetables she foraged. They did not speak much at first, but as his strength returned, conversation began to flow more easily. "Why did you help me that day?" Tarza asked one evening as she stirred a pot of stew over the fire. "In the square. You did not know me." Ethan was sitting up now, propped against the cave wall with a fur draped over his shoulders. "Does it matter?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. "My mother was half-elven," he said finally. "She died when I was young, but I remember the way people looked at her, the way they whispered. I swore then that I would never stand by and watch someone be treated that way, not if I could do something about it." Tarza absorbed this, her hand stilling on the spoon. "I am sorry about your mother. It was a long time ago." He watched her with those steady gray eyes. "What about you? How did you end up here, alone?" She had never told anyone the full story, but something about the firelight and the closeness of the cave walls made her want to speak. So she told him about her clan, about the raids she had refused to join, about walking away from everything she had ever known. When she finished, her throat was tight and she had to look away. "That took courage," Ethan said quietly, "or foolishness." "No." His voice was firm. "Courage. You chose what was right over what was easy. That is the definition of bravery." Tarza felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked away for a very long time. She blinked against the sudden sting in her eyes and turned back to the stew, ladling it into wooden bowls. They ate in comfortable silence, and afterward Ethan told her stories about his travels, about the places he had seen and the people he had met. "Why were you on that road?" she asked. "Where were you going?" "Nowhere in particular." He shrugged. "I have been wandering for the past 2 years, ever since my father died. He had a farm, but I sold it. I did not want to stay in one place." "You want to stay in one place now?" The question hung between them, heavier than she had intended. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. "I am beginning to think I might," he said softly. The days turned into a week, then 2. Ethan's wound healed well, the angry red fading to pink and then to white scar tissue. He grew stronger, able to move around the cave and even to help with small tasks. Tarza found herself looking forward to his presence, to the sound of his voice and the way he listened when she spoke. It was a strange and terrifying feeling, this opening of her heart to another person. One afternoon, as they sat outside the cave entrance working on repairing some of Tarza's snares, Ethan reached over and took her hand. She froze, staring down at where his calloused palm pressed against her green skin. "Tarza," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I am healed now. I could leave, return to the road." He turned her hand over, tracing the lines on her palm with one finger. "But I do not want to." She could not breathe. "Why not?" "Because in these weeks I have been here, I have felt more at home than I have in years. Because you are the kindest, strongest person I have ever met. Because when I think about leaving, about never seeing you again, it feels like losing something precious." Tarza pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. "You should not say things like that." "Why not?" He stood as well, moving to face her. "Because you are an orc and I am human. Because people would not understand." "Yes." The word came out fierce. "Exactly because of that. You saw what they did to me in that square. Imagine what they would do if they knew you cared for me. I do not give a damn what they think." Ethan stepped closer, and she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Do you feel nothing for me, Tarza? Can you honestly say you want me to leave?" She could not say it. The lie would not form on her tongue. Instead, she turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. "It does not matter what I feel. This cannot happen." "Why not?" "Because I will not watch you destroyed for choosing me. Because you deserve better than a life hiding in a cave. Because I am afraid." The last words came out as barely a whisper, and she felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I am so afraid, Ethan." She felt his hands on her shoulders, gentle but firm, turning her to face him. He cupped her face in his palms, his thumbs brushing away her tears, and when she finally met his eyes, she saw no pity there, only understanding and something deeper. "I am afraid too," he said. "But I am more afraid of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. I am tired of wandering, Tarza. I want to stay. I want to stay with you." "Ethan." His name was a plea, a prayer, everything she could not bring herself to say. He kissed her then, soft and careful, asking rather than demanding. For a heartbeat, Tarza stood frozen, unable to believe this was real. Then something inside her surrendered, and she kissed him back with all the loneliness and longing she had kept locked away for so long. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she wrapped her own around his neck and let herself fall into the impossible beauty of being held. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Let me stay with you. We can figure out the rest together." Tarza nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They stood there for a long time, holding each other as the sun sank lower in the sky and painted the hills in shades of gold and rose. That night, they lay together on the furs, Tarza's head resting on Ethan's chest as his fingers traced idle patterns on her arm. They talked about small things and large things, about hopes and fears and all the space in between. It felt like learning a new language, this vulnerability, but with each word Tarza felt more certain that this was right. "What do we do now?" she asked eventually. "We cannot stay in this cave forever." "Why not?" She lifted her head to look at him. "You would want that, to live here, hidden away." "I would live anywhere with you." He brushed a strand of dark hair from her face. "But you are right. We cannot hide forever. We need a real home, a real life." "Where would we go?" "Humans will not accept me, and my people have cast me out." Ethan was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There are places on the frontier, settlements so new that old prejudices have not taken root yet, places where people are too busy surviving to care about what anyone looks like. We could go there, build a homestead. It would be hard work, but we would be together." "You would give up everything for that. For me, I have nothing to give up except loneliness." He pulled her close again. "With you, I would have everything. Tarza closed her eyes, letting his words sink into her bones. She had spent 3 years believing she would always be alone, that love was not meant for someone like her. But here was Ethan, offering her a future she had not dared to dream of. "Then we go," she said. "We find a place to build a home." They spent the next week preparing for the journey. Ethan made a trip back to the village where they had first met, where he had left his horse and pack before being attacked by bandits. He returned with supplies and news that the bandits had been captured by the local militia, which meant the roads were safer now. Tarza gathered her herbs and the few possessions she owned, and together they mapped out a route toward the eastern frontier, where new settlements were springing up along the river valleys. On the morning they left, Tarza stood at the entrance to the cave and looked back one last time. This place had been her sanctuary, her shelter from a world that did not want her. But it had also been a prison, keeping her isolated and alone. Now she was leaving it behind for something uncertain but infinitely more precious. Ethan came to stand beside her, his pack settled on his shoulders. "Ready?" She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Ready." They walked through the hills together, 2 figures against the vast landscape, and with each step Tarza felt the weight of the past lifting from her shoulders. The journey ahead would not be easy, she knew that. But for the first time in 3 years, she was not alone. The trip east took them nearly a month. They traveled through valleys and over ridges, skirting villages when they could and enduring suspicious stares when they could not. Twice they were turned away from inns, forced to camp in the woods instead. Once, a group of young men followed them for miles, shouting insults until Ethan turned and faced them down with such cold fury that they scattered like leaves. But there were good moments too. Farmers who gave them food and directions without comment. A traveling merchant who traded fairly for Tarza's herbs and told them about a valley settlement that welcomed all comers. Children who stared with curiosity rather than fear until their parents hurried them away. Through it all, Ethan never wavered. He walked beside Tarza with his head held high, making it clear to anyone who looked that she was under his protection. And slowly, gradually, Tarza began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. They reached the eastern frontier on a warm afternoon in late spring. The settlement was called Willow Creek, a cluster of cabins and farms spread along both sides of a wide, clear river. It was small, perhaps 30 families in total, and as they walked down the main path, Tarza braced herself for the hostility she had come to expect. But the people here barely looked up. They were too busy with their own lives, their own struggles to survive in this harsh land. A woman carrying water gave them a nod. A man repairing a fence waved. No one spit. No one shouted. They found the settlement leader, a weathered woman named Martha, who looked them both up and down with shrewd eyes. "You want land?" she asked bluntly. "Yes," Ethan said. "We are looking to homestead." Martha glanced at Tarza, and for a moment Tarza tensed, waiting for the rejection, but Martha only shrugged. "Can you work? Can you pull your weight?" "Yes," Tarza said, finding her voice. "I am strong, I know herbs and healing, I can hunt. Good." "We need healers out here." Martha gestured toward the north. "There is unclaimed land about 2 miles upriver. Good soil close to the water. You clear it, build on it, and it is yours. We do not have much use for papers and deeds out here. Your word is your bond." Ethan and Tarza exchanged a glance, hope flickering between them. "Thank you," Ethan said. Martha waved a hand. "Thank me by surviving the first winter. Half the people who come out here are gone by spring. This land does not forgive weakness." They found the plot Martha had described, a stretch of fertile ground bordered by the river on one side and forest on the other. It was overgrown with brush and saplings, untouched and wild, but Tarza could see the potential. She could imagine a cabin here, a garden, maybe even a barn eventually. "What do you think?" Ethan asked, coming to stand beside her. "I think it is perfect." They set to work immediately, clearing land and felling trees for lumber. The work was back-breaking, especially in the heat of early summer, but they fell into a rhythm. Ethan's strength complemented Tarza's, and together they accomplished more than either could have alone. He taught her carpentry, how to notch logs and fit them together. She taught him which plants were edible and which were poisonous, how to track game and set snares. The other settlers began to take notice. Some kept their distance, clearly uncomfortable with Tarza's presence. But others, particularly those who had come out here fleeing their own pasts, were more accepting. A young couple named Iris and Thomas brought them a basket of bread and vegetables as a welcoming gift. An older man named Gerald offered to help with the heavy timber work in exchange for some of Tarza's herbal remedies for his aching joints. Slowly, carefully, they began to build not just a home but a place in the community. By midsummer, the cabin was taking shape. It was small, just one room with a loft for sleeping and a stone fireplace for cooking and warmth, but it was sturdy and well built. Tarza spent her days finishing the interior while Ethan worked on a small barn and chicken coop. They talked as they worked, planning for the future, discussing whether they should plant wheat or barley, how many chickens to buy, what they would need to get through the winter. It was during one of these conversations, as they sat on the half-finished porch watching the sun set over the river, that Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved figure. "I made this," he said, holding it out to her. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have it." Tarza took the carving, turning it over in her hands. It was a wolf, beautifully detailed, caught mid-stride as if running through an invisible forest. The wood was smooth and warm from being carried in Ethan's pocket. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Why a wolf?" "Because wolves mate for life." Ethan took her free hand, holding it gently. "Tarza, I know we have not talked about this directly, but I need you to know how I feel. I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build this homestead together, grow old together. If you will have me, I want to be your mate, your partner, your husband in every way that matters." Tarza felt tears spill down her cheeks, but for once they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I have loved you since the day you stood up for me in that square. I want all of that, everything you said." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Then we are bound," he murmured against her hair. "From this day forward for as long as we both live." They stayed there on the porch until the stars came out, wrapped in each other and in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. They had found each other. The summer passed in a blur of work and laughter and growing love. The cabin was finished, the garden planted, the barn completed. Tarza's skill with herbs became known throughout the settlement, and people began to seek her out for remedies and healing. She delivered a baby for Iris and Thomas, set Gerald's broken finger, cured a child's fever with willow bark tea. Each success made her feel more solidly part of the community, less like an outsider. But not everyone was pleased by their presence. There was a man named Cyrus Drake, who owned the largest farm in the settlement, a bitter individual who had come west after his wife left him. He made no secret of his dislike for Tarza, muttering loudly whenever she passed that orcs should not be allowed among decent folk. Ethan confronted him once, and the encounter nearly came to blows before other settlers intervened. "He is harmless," Martha told them afterward. "All bark and no bite. Just ignore him." But Tarza could not quite shake the feeling that Cyrus was more dangerous than Martha believed. She saw the way he looked at her, with a hatred that went beyond simple prejudice. It was personal, consuming, and it made her uneasy. As autumn arrived and the leaves began to turn, Tarza realized she was happier than she had ever been in her life. She and Ethan had settled into a comfortable domesticity, cooking meals together and sleeping curled around each other in the loft. They worked side by side during the day and talked by the fire at night. It was everything she had never known she wanted. One cool evening in early October, as they were preparing dinner, there was a knock at the door. Ethan opened it to find a young boy from the settlement, no more than 10 years old, breathing hard as if he had run the entire way. "You have to come," the boy gasped. "My sister, she fell from the barn loft. She is not waking up." Tarza grabbed her herb bag without hesitation. "Take us there." They ran through the twilight, following the boy to a farm on the south edge of the settlement. Inside the cabin, they found a girl of about 8 lying on a bed, pale and still. Her parents hovered nearby, faces stricken with fear. Tarza knelt beside the girl, checking her breathing and pulse, gently examining her head. She found a lump behind the girl's right ear, swollen and tender. A head injury then, possibly serious. "I need cold water and clean cloths," she said calmly. As the mother rushed to comply, Tarza mixed a tincture from her bag, something to reduce swelling and ease pain. She managed to get a few drops between the girl's lips, then applied a cold compress to the injury. For hours she worked, monitoring the girl's breathing, adjusting her position, speaking to her in a low, soothing voice. Ethan stayed beside her, supporting her, fetching whatever she needed. The parents watched with desperate hope, and the boy sat in the corner, silent tears streaming down his face. Near midnight, the girl's eyes finally fluttered open. She was confused and nauseous, but she was awake. Tarza nearly collapsed with relief. "She needs to rest," she told the parents. "Keep her still for the next few days. Wake her every few hours to make sure she can respond. If she gets worse, send for me immediately." The father gripped Tarza's hand, his eyes wet. Thank you so much. We thought we had lost her." As Tarza and Ethan walked back to their cabin in the dark, she felt Ethan's arm around her shoulders. "You saved that girl's life," he said softly. "I did what anyone would do." "No, you did what a healer does, what a good person does." He kissed her temple. "I am so proud of you." Word of the healing spread quickly through Willow Creek. In the days that followed, more people came to Tarza for help, and the few who had remained distant began to warm to her. She was no longer just the orc woman living on the edge of the settlement. She was Tarza, the healer, someone valuable and needed, but Cyrus Drake's hostility only deepened. Tarza caught him watching her from across the settlement square one day, his face twisted with such venom that she instinctively stepped back. When she told Ethan about it that night, he frowned. "I do not like this," he said. "Maybe I should talk to him again." "No," Tarza shook her head. "That will only make it worse. Martha is right. He is just one bitter man. We cannot let him ruin what we have built here." But 2 weeks later, as the first snows began to fall, Cyrus made his move. Tarza was returning from checking on the girl she had healed, walking through the forest path that led back to her cabin, when she heard movement in the trees. She turned, hand going to the knife at her belt, just as Cyrus stepped out onto the path. He was holding a cudgel, and there was a wildness in his eyes that made Tarza's blood run cold. "You do not belong here," he said, his voice shaking. "You are a monster, and you have bewitched these people into thinking otherwise, but I see what you are. Cyrus, do not do this." Tarza kept her voice calm, though her heart was racing. "I have done nothing to you. Your kind killed my son." The words came out raw, anguished. 5 years ago in a border raid. He was only 15. And now you walk around here like you have a right to be among us, like you are one of us. But you are not, you never will be. Understanding crashed over Tarza like a wave. This was not about her at all. It was about his pain, his grief, his need for someone to blame. "I am sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "Truly. But I did not kill your son. I have never raided a human village. I left my clan because I refused to do so." "I do not care." Cyrus raised the cudgel. "You are an orc. That is enough." He lunged at her, swinging the cudgel in a vicious arc. Tarza dodged, her orc reflexes saving her, but she stumbled on the uneven ground and fell. Cyrus stood over her, raising the cudgel for another blow, and in that moment Tarza knew she could fight back. She was stronger than him, faster. She could take the cudgel away, could hurt him badly if she chose. But if she did, she would only prove him right. She would be the monster he believed her to be. So instead, she raised her arms to protect her head and waited for the blow. It never came. There was a roar of fury, and then Ethan was there, tackling Cyrus to the ground. The two men rolled across the path, fists flying, and Tarza scrambled to her feet just as Ethan landed a solid punch that sent Cyrus sprawling. "You ever touch her again," Ethan snarled, standing over him, "and I will end you. You understand me?" Cyrus spat blood, his eyes glazed with pain and rage. But before he could respond, more voices filled the air. Martha arrived with several other settlers, drawn by the commotion. They took in the scene quickly, Cyrus on the ground, Ethan standing protectively in front of Tarza, the cudgel lying in the dirt. "What happened here?" Martha demanded. "He attacked Tarza," Ethan said, his voice still rough with anger. "I got here just in time." Martha looked at Cyrus, her expression hard. "Is this true?" Cyrus said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Martha turned to two of the men. "Take him back to his farm. We will deal with this tomorrow at the council meeting." As Cyrus was led away, Martha approached Tarza. "Are you hurt?" "No, Ethan got here in time." Tarza was trembling now, the adrenaline wearing off. "Martha, I never did anything to him, I swear." "I know." Martha's voice was surprisingly gentle. "His son was killed by orcs years ago. He has not been right since. That is not an excuse, but it is an explanation." She sighed heavily. "This will be addressed. You have my word." The council meeting the next day was tense. The entire settlement gathered in the largest cabin, cramped together as Martha and the other council members heard the case. Cyrus stood on one side, defiant and unrepentant. Tarza and Ethan stood on the other, backed by Gerald and Iris and Thomas, and the parents of the girl Tarza had healed. "Cyrus Drake attacked Tarza without provocation," Martha said, her voice carrying through the room. "This is a serious offense. We do not tolerate violence in this community." "She is an orc," Cyrus shouted. "She does not deserve our protection." "She is a member of this settlement," Martha shot back. "She owns land here, she works here. She has healed our children, that makes her one of us." There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd, not everyone but enough. Tarza felt her throat tighten as she realized that more people were nodding than frowning, that she had earned a place here after all. "The council's decision is this," Martha continued. "Cyrus Drake, you will leave Willow Creek. You have 1 week to gather your belongings and go. If you are found here after that, you will be forcibly removed." Cyrus's face went white, then red. "You are exiling me for defending myself against a monster." "You attacked an unarmed woman on a forest path," Martha said coldly. "That is not defense. That is attempted murder. Be grateful we are only exiling you and not turning you over to the territorial marshal." Cyrus looked around the room, perhaps hoping for support, but found none. With a final glare of pure hatred at Tarza, he stormed out. The meeting dissolved into conversation, and several people came over to speak with Tarza and Ethan, offering words of support and solidarity. Iris hugged Tarza tightly. "We are glad you are here," she whispered. "Please do not let one bitter man drive you away." "I will not," Tarza promised, and she meant it. That night, as she and Ethan lay in their loft, she turned to him in the darkness. "You saved me again." "You saved yourself," he murmured, pulling her close. "You chose not to fight back. You could have hurt him badly, but you did not. That took more courage than fighting ever could. I was afraid that if I fought, I would prove him right. You proved him wrong just by being who you are." Ethan kissed her forehead. "I love you, Tarza. I am so grateful the universe brought you into my life. I love you too." She pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could have this. A home, a community, someone who loves me. You deserve all of it and more." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, and Tarza dreamed of spring and growing things and a future that stretched out bright and welcoming before them. Winter came hard and fast to Willow Creek. The snows were deep, the winds brutal, and the days short and dark. But inside their cabin, Tarza and Ethan were warm and content. They spent the long evenings by the fire, talking and reading and simply being together. Ethan was teaching Tarza to read, which she had never learned in her clan, and she delighted in piecing together words and sentences. Cyrus left as ordered, vanishing into the snowy landscape without another word. Tarza felt relief at his departure, though part of her also felt sorrow for the broken man he had become. She understood loss, understood how pain could warp a person. She just wished he could have found healing instead of hatred. The winter was long, but the settlement pulled together to survive it. People shared food and firewood, helped each other repair damage from storms, gathered in the evening to tell stories and share warmth. Tarza found herself welcomed into this circle, her stories of the mountains and her clan fascinating to people who had never met an orc before. "Were you really cast out for refusing to raid?" a young woman named Sarah asked one evening. "Yes," Tarza said. "My clan believed that strength was everything, that we had to prove ourselves through battle, but I could not see the point of it. Killing and stealing and burning, it did not make us stronger. It just made us feared and alone." "Do you miss them?" Sarah asked. Tarza considered the question carefully. "I miss my grandmother who taught me about herbs. I miss the mountains where I grew up. But the clan itself? No, they were not my people, not really. My people are here now." She glanced at Ethan as she said it, and he smiled at her, his eyes warm with love. Around the room, other faces smiled too, and Tarza felt a swell of belonging so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and bringing green back to the world, Tarza and Ethan threw themselves into expanding their homestead. They planted a larger garden, bought more chickens, and even acquired a pair of goats for milk. The work was hard but satisfying, and their farm began to thrive. One warm afternoon in late April, as they were planting potatoes, Tarza suddenly straightened and pressed a hand to her stomach. Ethan looked up, concern crossing his face. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong." Tarza's voice was wondering. "Ethan, I think I might be with child." He went very still. "Are you certain?" "Not certain, but I have missed my bleeding and I have been feeling strange in the mornings." She looked at him, suddenly afraid. "Is that all right? I know we never talked about children." Ethan dropped the shovel and crossed to her in 3 long strides, pulling her into his arms. "All right, Tarza, it is more than all right. It is wonderful, truly, truly." He pulled back to look at her face, his own expression radiant. "We are going to be parents." Over the next few weeks, as Tarza's suspicions were confirmed and her body began to change, she found herself oscillating between joy and terror. She had never thought about being a mother, had never imagined bringing a child into the world. What if she was not good at it? What if the child inherited her green skin and tusks and faced the same prejudice she had? What if something went wrong during the birth? Ethan was a steady presence through all her fears. "We will figure it out together," he told her over and over. "Our child will be loved, no matter what. That is all that matters." The settlement rallied around them as well. The women, in particular, took Tarza under their wing, sharing advice and stories and old family remedies for morning sickness and swollen feet. Iris, who was pregnant with her second child, became a close friend, and the two of them spent long afternoons together, sewing baby clothes and talking about their hopes for their children. "You think they will be friends?" Iris asked one day, her hand resting on her own swollen belly. "Our little ones, I hope so," Tarza said. "I want my child to grow up with friends, with people who accept them. They will." Iris squeezed her hand. "This is a good place, Tarza. We are all outcasts here in one way or another. That is what makes us strong." As summer arrived and Tarza's belly grew round, she and Ethan began to prepare in earnest for the baby's arrival. Ethan built a cradle from smooth pine, carving patterns of wolves and trees into the sides. Tarza gathered all the herbs she would need for the birth, consulting with the other women about what to expect. Together they chose a name, Alara for a girl, Eric for a boy. "Either way," Ethan said, "they will have a name that starts with E, like me." "And a strong name," Tarza added. "A name worthy of the person they will become." In August, as the heat lay heavy over the valley and the corn grew tall in the fields, Tarza's pains began. Ethan sent for Iris and Martha, and the two women arrived quickly, taking charge with the calm competence of those who had done this many times before. They set up the cabin, boiled water, gave Ethan tasks to keep him busy and out of the way. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the afternoon and into the night. Tarza had faced many things in her life, but nothing had prepared her for this particular brand of pain. She gripped Ethan's hand so hard she thought she might break his fingers, and he never once complained, just whispered encouragement and love into her ear. Finally, as the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry. Martha cleaned her and wrapped her in soft cloth, then placed her in Tarza's arms. "Alara," Tarza whispered, looking down at the tiny face. The baby had her father's gray eyes and her mother's pointed ears, her skin a soft olive green, lighter than Tarza's but clearly not fully human. She was perfect. Ethan knelt beside the bed, his face wet with tears, and touched one finger to his daughter's cheek. "Hello, little one. We have been waiting for you." The baby blinked up at him, solemn and new, and Tarza felt her heart expand to hold this impossible love. Everything she had been through, all the pain and rejection and loneliness had led to this moment, this family, this home. "Thank you," she said to Ethan, though the words felt inadequate. "For what? For finding me, for loving me, for giving me this." He kissed her softly. "Thank you for letting me." The settlement celebrated the birth with gifts and food and warm wishes. Even the people who had been most reserved around Tarza came to visit, bringing blankets and toys and advice. Everyone wanted to meet little Alara, to welcome the newest member of Willow Creek. In the weeks that followed, as Tarza healed and adjusted to motherhood, she found herself thinking often about the day in the market square when Ethan had first stepped forward to defend her. That single act of courage had changed everything. It had given her hope when she had none, had shown her that the world held kindness as well as cruelty. And now, looking at Alara sleeping in her cradle, Tarza knew that she would teach her daughter the same lesson. That love could cross any boundary, that courage meant standing up for what was right even when it was hard. That home was not a place, but the people you chose to be with. One cool evening in early autumn, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset with Alara nestled between them, Ethan took Tarza's hand. You remember the first thing I ever said to you? He asked. Tarza smiled. You said that is enough, and everyone went quiet. I meant it then and I mean it now. Enough hate, enough fear, enough letting the past dictate the future. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. What we have here, what we have built together, this is what matters. This is enough. No, Tarza said softly, looking at her daughter, at her husband, at the home they had created from nothing. This is everything. As the years passed, their family grew. Ilara was joined by a son, Eric, and then another daughter, Emma. The farm prospered, expanding to include fields of wheat and a small orchard. Tarza's reputation as a healer spread beyond Willow Creek, and people began to travel from other settlements to seek her help. Ethan became known as a skilled carpenter and a fair man, always willing to help a neighbor in need. Together, they were pillars of the community, respected and valued. The few who still harbored prejudice against Tarza kept it to themselves, unwilling to challenge the united front that the settlement presented. Their children grew up strong and happy, playing with the other children of Willow Creek without regard for the color of anyone's skin. Ilara, with her mother's gift for healing, began learning herbs at a young age. Eric inherited his father's skill with his hands and could build anything he set his mind to. Emma was quieter than her siblings, but she had a gift for growing things, and the garden flourished under her care. On warm evenings, the family would gather on the porch, watching the sun set over the river. Ethan would play a wooden flute he had carved, filling the air with simple, beautiful melodies. Tarza would hold his hand, feeling the roughness of his calluses against her palm, and think about how far they had come. Tell us the story, Ilara would beg, about how you met. And Tarza would tell them, never growing tired of the tale. She would describe the market square, the spit on her cheek, the moment Ethan stepped forward and changed her life forever. The children would listen with wide eyes, even though they had heard it 100 times before. Were you scared, Mama? Emma would ask. Yes, Tarza would admit. I was very scared, but your father taught me that courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what is right even when you are afraid. And Mama taught me, Ethan would add, that love is not about what someone looks like or where they come from. It is about who they are in their heart. As the children grew older, they began to venture out into the wider world. Ilara traveled to other settlements to study healing with different practitioners. Eric took commissions from towns farther east, building barns and homes and making a name for himself as a craftsman. Emma stayed close to home, content with the farm and the life she knew. But they always came back to Willow Creek, to the cabin where they had grown up, to the parents who had taught them the meaning of love and courage. And when they came, they brought stories of a changing world, where mixed families like theirs were becoming more common, where the old prejudices were slowly giving way to understanding. One spring day, when Tarza's hair had begun to show streaks of gray and Ethan's face was lined with the marks of laughter and hard work, a stranger arrived in Willow Creek. She was an orc woman, young and travel-worn, and she asked for Tarza by name. Tarza met her in the settlement square, the same square where she had once been chased away by hateful words. I am Tarza. How can I help you? The young woman's eyes filled with tears. My name is Kara. I heard about you from a trader. He said there was an orc woman living peacefully among humans, that she had a family and a home. I did not believe it could be true. It is true, Tarza said gently. Why have you come? Because I am like you. I do not fit with my clan. They want me to raid and kill, but I cannot do it. Kara's voice broke. They will cast me out soon. I do not know where to go. Tarza felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of her younger self in this frightened woman. She reached out and took Kara's hand. You can stay here, we will help you, but I have nothing to offer. You have yourself. That is enough." Tarza smiled. "Come, let me show you around and we can talk about what comes next." As she led Kara through the settlement, introducing her to the other residents and showing her the life that was possible here, Tarza felt a deep sense of gratitude. The path from that market square to this moment had been long and difficult, but it had been worth every step. That night, as she and Ethan lay in bed, she told him about Kara. "I think she will stay," Tarza said. "I think she will find what she needs here." "Just like you did," Ethan murmured, pulling her close, "just like I did." Tarza rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the familiar sound of his breathing. "Do you ever regret it, choosing me, choosing this life, not for a single moment?" He kissed the top of her head. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Tarza. You and our children and this life we built. I would choose it all over again 1,000 times. I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. Always." As Tarza drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the warmth of her husband and the knowledge that her children were safe in their beds, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the hatred of that market square to the love of this home, she had traveled far. But more than that, the world itself had traveled, had changed in small but significant ways. She had not set out to change anything, had only wanted to survive, to find a place where she belonged. But in living her life, in loving and being loved, she had shown people that orcs were not monsters. That difference did not have to mean enemy. That courage could look like stepping forward when everyone else stepped back. And now, with Kara and perhaps others like her finding their way to Willow Creek, the change would continue. Slowly, one person at a time, one choice at a time, the world would become a place where love mattered more than fear. Tarza smiled in the darkness, feeling Ethan's arms around her, and let herself rest in the peace they had created together. The square where she had once stood alone and afraid was far behind her now. Ahead lay only the future, bright and full of possibility, shaped by the simple truth that had sustained them from the very beginning. Love was enough. Love was everything. And love, in the end, would always be worth fighting for. The years continued to unfold, bringing with them the natural rhythms of life in Willow Creek. Kara, the young orc woman who had sought refuge, eventually married a human blacksmith named Daniel and had children of her own. Her presence, and that of the other mixed families that began to appear, transformed the settlement into something remarkable. A place where the old divisions held no power, where people were judged by their character rather than their appearance. Tarza watched it all with quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had played a part in creating this sanctuary. But she never sought recognition for it. She was content to live her life, to heal those who needed healing, to tend her garden and love her family. As Ethan's hair turned fully silver, and his hands grew gnarled with age, he would often sit on the porch in the evening sun, whittling figures for his grandchildren. Tarza would join him there, her own body showing the marks of time, and they would talk about the old days and the good days, and how they were all the same really, because they had always been together. "Do you think," Ethan asked one evening as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, "that when we are gone, people will remember us?" Tarza considered the question. "Some will, perhaps, but it does not matter if they remember our names. What matters is that they remember what we proved." "And what is that?" "That love is stronger than hate, that courage can change the world, that one person stepping forward can make all the difference." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his as she had done 1,000 times before. "That is what people need to remember." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "They will. Look at this place. Look at what we helped create. That is our legacy." And it was true. Willow Creek had become known throughout the territory as a place of tolerance and acceptance, where anyone could find a home regardless of their past. Other settlements began to follow their example, slowly at first but with growing momentum. The change was not universal, and there were still places where old hatreds festered, but the tide was turning. On a warm summer day, when the wheat was ripe in the fields and the river ran clear and bright, the entire settlement gathered for a celebration. It was the 50th anniversary of Willow Creek's founding, and Martha, now ancient and frail but still sharp-minded, gave a speech about the community they had built. "We came here as strangers," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd, "fleeing our pasts, seeking new beginnings. And we found more than that. We found each other. We found that our differences made us stronger, not weaker. We found that when we work together, when we choose love over fear, we can create something beautiful." She gestured to Tarza and Ethan, who sat in the front row with their children and grandchildren around them. "This woman and this man showed us the way. They proved that the walls we build between people are imaginary, that they crumble in the face of genuine love and courage. For that, we owe them our gratitude." The crowd erupted in applause, and Tarza felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Ethan put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close, and she leaned into him with the ease of long familiarity. "We did it," she whispered. "We really did it." "We did," he agreed. "Together." As the celebration continued around them, with music and dancing and laughter filling the air, Tarza let her gaze wander over the faces of the people she loved. Her children, grown and strong. Her grandchildren, playing without a care in the world. Her friends and neighbors, human and orc alike, living in harmony. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible on that terrible day in the market square. It was more than she had dared to hope for when she had lived alone in her cave, believing she would always be an outcast. But Ethan had stepped forward and everything had changed. That night, as they lay in bed for what would be one of the last times, Ethan turned to Tarza in the darkness. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice soft. "What is it?" "I am tired, my love, more tired than I have ever been." He took her hand, holding it gently. "I do not think I have much time left." Tarza felt her throat close with grief, but she forced herself to speak calmly. "How long have you known?" "A few months. I did not want to worry you." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles as he had done so many times before. "I am not afraid. I have lived a good life, a full life. I have loved you and been loved by you. What more could anyone ask for?" "Do not leave me," Tarza whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep inside her. "Please, Ethan, I cannot do this without you. You can. You are the strongest person I know." He pulled her close, and she pressed her face against his chest, feeling the slow, steady beat of his heart. "Promise me something, anything. Promise me you will keep living, keep healing. Keep showing people what love looks like. Do not let grief turn you bitter." "I promise," she managed, though her voice was breaking. "Good." He stroked her hair, the gesture achingly familiar. "I love you, Tarza. From the moment I saw you in that square until this very second and beyond. You are my everything. And you are mine," she whispered. They held each other through the night, and when morning came, Ethan's breathing had grown shallow. The family gathered around the bed, tears streaming down their faces as they said their goodbyes. Alara held her father's hand. Eric told him stories of his recent projects. Emma placed fresh flowers on the bedside table. And Tarza sat beside him, her hand in his, watching the face she had loved for so many years. She told him about the first time she had seen him, about how his courage had saved her in more ways than one. She reminded him of the cabin they had built, the children they had raised, the life they had shared. As the sun began to set, painting the room in golden light, Ethan opened his eyes one last time and looked at Tarza. "The square," he whispered. I would step forward again. I know, she said through her tears. I know you would. He smiled, that same gentle smile she had fallen in love with all those years ago, and then he was gone. The grief was a physical thing, a weight that pressed down on Tarza's chest and made it hard to breathe. But she remembered her promise and she did not let it break her. She mourned, deeply and truly, but she also kept living. She continued her healing work, cared for her grandchildren, tended her garden, and she told Ethan's story to anyone who would listen. About the man who had stepped forward in a market square when everyone else stepped back. About the courage it took to love across boundaries. About the life they had built together, against all odds. Years passed, and Tarza grew old in the way of orcs, her green skin weathering like leather, her tusks yellowing with age. But her eyes remained bright, and her heart remained full. She lived to see her grandchildren married and her great-grandchildren born. She lived to see Willow Creek grow into a thriving town, a beacon of tolerance in a still divided world. And when her own time came, on a spring morning when the flowers were blooming and the river sang its eternal song, she went peacefully, surrounded by the family that she and Ethan had created. Her last words were his name, spoken with love and longing, and the sure knowledge that wherever he was, she would find him again. They buried her beside Ethan, on a hill overlooking the homestead they had built together. The entire town came to pay their respects, humans and orcs and every variation in between. They spoke of her kindness, her strength, her healing gifts. They spoke of the legacy she left behind. But the most important words were spoken by Alara, who stood at her mother's grave with tears streaming down her face. My mother taught me many things, she said to the gathered crowd. She taught me about herbs and healing. She taught me about courage and resilience. But most importantly, she taught me about love. She showed me that love can cross any divide, can overcome any obstacle, can change the world one heart at a time. She looked around at the faces gathered there, at the evidence of everything her parents had helped create. My father stepped forward in a market square 50 years ago, and that single act of courage changed everything. Not just for my mother, but for all of us. He showed us what it means to stand up for what is right, even when it is hard, even when it is frightening, even when you stand alone. Alara placed a bundle of herbs on her mother's grave, then one on her father's. They are together now, and they always will be, and we carry their legacy forward. We choose love over hate. We choose courage over fear. We step forward every day in every way we can. That is how we honor them. That is how we keep their story alive. As the crowd dispersed, making their way back down the hill, the sun broke through the clouds and painted everything in light. On the graves, the herbs Alara had left began to take root, their seeds carried by the wind to places near and far. And in Willow Creek, life went on. Children played in the square where Tarza had once stood alone. Mixed families lived side by side with human ones and orc ones. The old prejudices were not gone, but they were fading, replaced by something better. Something Tarza and Ethan had started with a single act of courage. Their story became a legend, told around fires and passed down through generations. The orc girl and the human man who had dared to love when love was forbidden. The couple who had proved that family was not about blood or species, but about choice and commitment, and the courage to stand together against a hostile world. And whenever someone new arrived in Willow Creek, running from their past or seeking a new beginning, the residents would tell them about Tarza and Ethan. About the day in the market square when a stranger stepped forward and every mouth went quiet. About how that moment had planted a seed that grew into something beautiful, because that was the truth at the heart of their story. That change begins with a single person, a single choice, a single moment of courage. That love is revolutionary, and choosing it in the face of hate is the bravest thing anyone can do. That the walls between people are built by fear and torn down by compassion, and that sometimes, when you step forward to defend a stranger, you find your destiny, you find your home. You find the person who will change your life and help you change the world. In the years and decades that followed, Willow Creek became a symbol throughout the territory. Other settlements looked to it as an example, and slowly but surely, the idea spread. Mixed communities became more common. Interspecies relationships were less scandalous. The children born of these unions grew up to be leaders and healers and builders, bridges between worlds that had once been implacable enemies. And through it all, the story of Tarza and Ethan endured. It was carved into a monument in the center of Willow Creek Square, the same square where their story had begun. It was sung in ballads and told in tales. It became part of the fabric of the territory's history, a reminder of what was possible when people chose love over fear. The homestead remained in the family, passed down through the generations. Each new owner added their own touches, but they all maintained the core of what Tarza and Ethan had built. The cabin was expanded but never replaced. The garden was tended with care. The graves on the hill were visited regularly, kept clear of weeds and adorned with fresh flowers. And on warm summer evenings, if you stood very still on that hill and listened carefully, you might hear the faint sound of a wooden flute playing a simple, beautiful melody. You might feel the presence of two souls who had loved deeply and well, whose courage had changed the world in small but significant ways, because that is what true love does. It endures beyond death, beyond time, beyond the boundaries we try to place around it. It ripples outward, touching lives and changing hearts in ways we cannot always see, but that are no less real for being invisible. Tarza and Ethan's love had started with a single act of courage in a market square. It had grown into a family, a community, a movement. It had proved that the impossible was possible, that the barriers between people could be overcome, that love was always, always worth fighting for. And in the end, that was the only legacy that mattered. Not monuments or songs or stories, though those were valuable in their own way, but the simple, profound truth that they had lived their lives with integrity and love, that they had left the world better than they found it, and that their love had been a light in the darkness for all who knew them. They had stepped forward when others stepped back. They had chosen love when hate would have been easier. They had built a life and a family and a future together, against all odds and in the face of all opposition, and that, in the end, was everything.